In 1979, the chair of British American Tobacco, the world's second largest tobacco company, was also on the board of its biggest oil company, Exxon. At the same time, R.J. Reynolds Tobacco owned and operated a major oil firm. 2 decades earlier, the head of Standard Oil, now ExxonMobil, sat on American Cancer Society's Committee on Smoking and Public Policy, even as oil companies patented their own cigarette filters and met with tobacco companies to share cigarette testing techniques. As evidence mounts of the oil industry's decades-long campaign of climate deception and denial, Exxon and its allies assure us that oil is not the new tobacco. The 14 million documents of the tobacco archives prove Exxon right. Oil is not the new tobacco, but 6 decades ago, tobacco was the new oil. In December 1953, tobacco executives met in a New York hotel room to hatch a plan to confront the rising tide of science linking smoking with cancer. To help craft that plan, tobacco turned to PR firm Hill & Knowlton. Hill & Knowlton, in turn, drew on its long expertise supporting the oil industry. Richard Darrow, the principal architect of tobacco's strategy, also represented Hill & Knowlton's biggest oil company clients. In the years that followed, the tobacco conspirators looked repeatedly to oil industry campaigns on smog, lead, and other air pollutants for models, for resources, and for people. They turned to Stanford Research Institute, a key player in the oil industry's smoke and fumes effort, to develop a suitcase-sized testing kit that would sample smoke without attracting attention. They turned to Truesdell Laboratories, which in 1958 was doing the earliest documented climate research for the American Petroleum Institute, and to a former Standard Oil executive who recommended an array of scientists for the tobacco industry's scientific advisory board, nearly all with proven links to the oil industry, and many of whom would go on to work for tobacco. Consider Theodore Sterling, one of tobacco's most important assets in the fight to undermine cancer science. Sterling wasn't a medical doctor. He was a mathematician. He specialized in using statistics to argue that proving any specific link to cancer was virtually impossible, even with mountains of epidemiological data. Before he came to tobacco, Sterling honed his skills on behalf of Standard Oil's Ethel Corporation, using statistics to downplay the health risks of lead in gasoline. Returning to the same themes again and again and again, no matter how much evidence, there is always uncertainty, always doubt, always room for delay. In 1968, as Sterling developed a major report attacking the very feasibility of proving that smoking causes cancer, he turned for advice to Robert Eckert, medical director at Esso, now ExxonMobil, and a leader in API's successor to the Smoke and Fumes Committee. Eckert's recounting of oil industry experience proved central to the recommendations Sterling crafted for tobacco. These are only examples of a close and complex relationship between these industries that reaches back decades and continues today. For big tobacco, gas stations were vital retail outlets. For big oil, cigarettes were their biggest retail product after gasoline. They shared ad campaigns, market strategies, governance, PR firms, and even scientists. And lest we forget, they also shared lawsuits and lawyers when the public investigations of cigarette marketing began. But the tobacco companies had another reason to pay close attention to oil. In the early battles over rising cancer rates, each industry pointed a finger at the other to deflect attention from its own role. The resulting uncertainty benefited oil and tobacco alike. The tobacco archives are overflowing with research on smog, lead, even climate change, and overflowing with examples of how the oil industry was using that research to shape the science, shape public opinion, and shape policy. The oil industry created the organized apparatus of doubt years before tobacco. It wrote a playbook that used misinformation, obfuscation, and research filtered through front groups to attack science and sow uncertainty. Big tobacco used and refined that playbook for decades in its fight to keep us smoking, just as big oil is using it now, again, to keep us burning fossil fuels. Should we be surprised? Not really. Should we be fooled? Not again. 6 decades of deception is 6 decades too many. Confronted with its legacy of lies, big tobacco was forced to acknowledge them and begin, in some way, undoing the harm. It is time for oil to do the same.